Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're stepping right into the middle of what is, essentially, a 2,000-year-old historical crime scene. We're looking at the ancient historian Flavius Josephus, and specifically a single paragraph he wrote that has sparked one of the most intense, drawn-out debates in all of historical scholarship. Okay, let's just dive right into this text, because reading it immediately reveals the core problem. This passage, it's known as the Testimonium Flavianum, found in Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. But just look at this glowing praise. I mean, it sounds way too Christian for a non-believing first-century Jewish priest who is writing for a Roman audience, right?
And that leads us to the central mystery of our explainer today. Is this the ultimate ancient forgery? For centuries, scholars have basically been pulling their hair out over this puzzle. Was this text a massive fraud, like completely faked? Or maybe it was heavily tampered with by medieval Christian scribes who really wanted to force Josephus into sounding like a true believer. Well, we are reopening this cold case today thanks to a major breakthrough from T.C. Schmidt's 2025 book. Looking at the existing scholarly models, Schmidt offers a really compelling middle ground, which he calls substantial authenticity. He argues that actually Josephus did write this paragraph, but we've just been completely misunderstanding exactly what he was trying to say.
All right. Section 1. The stylometric fingerprint, analyzing the lexical DNA. Let's look at the actual evidence and see how this builds, starting with a forensic linguistic analysis of the original Greek words. So, to test the authenticity of the passage's 90 words, researchers didn't just guess, they used stylometry. If you don't know what that is, it's basically digital forensics for ancient authors. They mapped those 90 words against the sheer scale of Josephus's massive 467,298-word Greek corpus. They were hunting for his unconscious writing habits, his lexical DNA.
And the results brilliantly illustrate that this passage isn't some obvious lexical alien. Out of those 90 words, there's literally only one unique word, what scholars call a hapax legomenon, and that word is Christianos. Mathematically, this rarity rate perfectly matches Josephus's normal distribution. Plus, the surrounding vocabulary clusters right where it should with the late books of the Antiquities. So the fingerprint, it actually matches Josephus's mature writing style perfectly.
Moving right along to Section 2, Decoding First-Century Shade. We're going to look at a new forensic translation. So the words belong to Josephus, but if they're his, we really have to ask, how on earth could a non-believing Jew write clauses that sound almost like early Christian baptismal confessions? Well, by comparing later Christian interpretations with how a first-century Roman or Jew would actually read them, everything flips. For instance, describing someone as a worker of paradoxical deeds, which is often translated today as miracle worker, that didn't mean divine endorsement to Josephus. Back then, it often meant someone was a doer of strange, unexpected, or even highly suspicious deeds. It's actually exactly how Josephus described Egyptian magicians. Take a look at the Greek particle eige. When later readers saw the phrase, "if indeed one ought to call him a man," they assumed Josephus was dropping a hint about divinity. But in Josephus's typical first-century usage, this is basically the ancient equivalent of air quotes. It is a skeptical barb. He's expressing hesitation, questioning if this figure was a charlatan or a sorcerer, and declining to decide exactly what sort of human he was even describing.
We see the exact same thing with the verb ephane. When Josephus writes that Jesus appeared to them alive, early translators took this as a full endorsement of the resurrection. But forensically, this word denotes perception or seeming. This is just detached historiography. Josephus is neutrally reporting the disciples' claims, meaning he seemed to them to be alive. He is absolutely not confessing a literal miracle himself.
This brings us to Section 3, the global paper trail, where we find clues in ancient translations.
Now this leaves the absolute hardest sentence to authenticate. He was the Christ. To solve this one, we have to trace what originally stood there before centuries of copying. And tracking these translations through the centuries reveals something super fascinating. Independent Latin, Syriac, and Arabic scribes didn't have that definitive declaration. Instead, they preserved a much softer, non-confessional version of the messianic claim. Jerome, in 393 CE, wrote, "He was believed to be the Christ." Later, Arabic manuscripts say, perhaps the Messiah.
When we compare this recovered, softer reading, "he was thought to be the Christ," it perfectly matches another universally accepted passage from Josephus regarding Jesus' brother James. Over in Antiquities 2200, Josephus calls James the brother of Jesus who is called Christ. Restoring this qualifier to our main text makes both passages speak with one cohesive, historically authentic voice.
Which leads right into Section 4, the aristocratic network, exploring a one-degree connection.
If Josephus authentically wrote this detached, somewhat skeptical report, we have to look at the social network that gave him access to the sensitive judicial information in the first place. Because Josephus wasn't just anybody. He was born into a high priestly Hasmonean family. We're talking ancient Judean royalty here, and he moved among the first men of Jerusalem. This inner circle included the highly aristocratic houses of Annas and Caiaphas, and those are the exact high priests who managed the historical trials of Jesus and a generation later James.
Just look at his specific use of the Greek phrase, the first men among us. Across all his writings, this phrase indicates groups he personally knew. By using it here, Josephus is basically name-dropping his immediate political circle. He's signaling to his Roman audience that he had one degree, family-level knowledge of the very men who prosecuted the trial. He is writing from close proximity.
And that takes us to our final part, Section 5, the historical verdict, the extra-biblical anchor.
Bringing all these linguistic, textual, and social clues together, we can finally reach a verdict on the historical value of this famous text. The crucial takeaway here is that this text is not a Christian forgery. Instead, it serves as enemy-adjacent, independent confirmation of a debated wonderworker, his crucifixion under Pilate by the leading Jerusalemites, and the origins of the disciples' persistent claims. It's a vital piece of historical bedrock. On the question of whether Josephus wrote about Jesus, case closed.
The source material also looks at how this fits into broader theology, specifically Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s framework. Within this view, this authentic, non-Christian testimony acts as an essential space-time anchor. It proves that these events weren't just abstract myths floating around in the ether, they happened in the concrete, highly political mud of first-century Rome.
Which leaves us with one final thought. We started with what looked like an obvious forgery, but by peeling back the layers of this 2,000-year-old linguistic mystery, we actually found a skeptic's detached report. It challenges us to ask, how does understanding this first-century shade ultimately strengthen our grasp on historical evidence? Well, when we remove our modern lenses and look at the actual words used in their original context, the past comes into a much sharper, more authentic focus. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you read.